firstly, I'll take you through what we found to be the biggest drivers of success in sales and service organisations. Secondly, we'll have a look at the results that can be achieved if we get these drivers right, based on some case studies of some programs that we've run. And following this, we'll have a look at our research that illustrates where we're currently at with the level of team leader effectiveness in the Australian market. We'll then focus on the critical elements that are the foundation of great team leader capability. And finally, we'll have a look at how these elements come together in a week in the life of a high-performing team leader and how you might be able to use this information to start some conversations that put you on the road to improving and reducing the gap to best practice. As we go through these, please ask as many questions as you can. To do this, you look in the control panel on the top right of your screen and you locate the questions tab, open this up and then type away. Now, whilst we might not be able to get to all of the questions we have today, if we can't get to them today, we absolutely give you the commitment that we will follow up and answer the questions by email following the webinar. Okay, let's get into the webinar and have a look at the critical drivers of success in a sales and service contact centre. Now, virtually all of the organisations we've worked with over many years are looking for some combination of these outputs that we've got on this screen. Sales are looking for conversion and things like cross-selling and upselling, and service is usually looking for a timely and efficient resolution to a customer issue. And if they're a forward-looking service and sort of sales-orientated contact centre, then they'll also be looking for things like referrals or even perhaps cross-sells. But both sales and service, whether they're being done in the one contact centre or in separate contact centres, are absolutely looking to do this in a way that delights the customer, such that the customers will come back, we gain repeat business, and probably more critical in the future is also that they'll recommend us to family and friends. Now, whilst organisations are very clear about the outputs and can usually measure them to the nth degree, particularly in contact centres, daily or even hourly some of these measures are coming through, there's much less clarity about the critical inputs and behaviours that drive these results. And even if the organisation does have some clarity about the inputs that are required, they certainly can't measure them in our experience. So let's have a look at the critical inputs that make the biggest difference. As you can see here, the biggest single input that we've found that you can use to influence to drive all of these outputs at once is the quality of the conversation between your frontline and the customer. Now, while we're not saying there aren't other elements like product pricing and marketing that influence the output metrics, what we are saying is that the most powerful lever that you can pull to impact all of these critical outputs is the quality of the conversation between the customer and the frontline in your organisation. So the next question is, well, what drives the quality of this conversation? And once again, it's the quality of the conversation, but this time it's between the leader and the front line, and more specifically in this case, team leaders. If you want to improve the quality of the conversation with the customer, then nothing will shift it more quickly than raising the quality and quantity of the conversations between team leaders and their team. This is why I made the point earlier about team leaders being the most critical leaders in your business. I'm sure to some degree you all recognise and have experience that supports what I'm saying, but do you know just how much of a difference driving these two input cogs can actually have on your business? So to illustrate that, what I want to show you here is some examples of some case studies which are based on some change programs that we've run in the past. Now, as you'll see here, the first one is about a large bank. So these were programs that specifically focused on driving the quality of the conversation with the customer by increasing the quality and quantity of the conversation between team leaders and their front line. So you see there in one of the big four banks, over 6,000 retail staff and 700 contact centres, we were able to increase productivity, customer satisfaction by 40%, customer satisfaction reached a 14-year high and they actually went to number one, and we had a 30% increase in the cross-sell. For the large Australian telco that you've got there, once again around 6,000 staff, There was an increase of $196 million in gross revenue. There was a 9% uplift in the sales productivity, and we're able to double the conversion rates. And the last one there is a large Australian general insurer, and they were, admittedly, they were coming off a low base, but they had a 600% increase in cross-sell. That added to $5 billion in extra revenue through gross written premiums, and they had a 111% increase in the client advocacy score. So what the results clearly show that focusing on the conversations that matter can dramatically improve the results in your organisation. So what exactly do we need TLs doing to deliver these sorts of results? So if we work on the principle that it is the right action by the right frequency that delivers the end results, then let's separate this into the two elements and start looking at what are the right actions. And the slide we've got here talks about the Big Four. Now, all the work that we've done over the last 25 years continues to reinforce what we call the Big Four. Now we know that there are other things that a TL must do in their day-to-day role. However, what we are saying that is that if they're not effectively delivering on these four routines, then they will not be able to realise the true potential of their team, and any other things that they do to try and improve performance will to some extent be window dressing because the foundations aren't actually in place. So let's talk through these quickly in more detail. I think the first one, and we've got it first there because it is the most important. If you're going to be an effective team leader in a change, an environment that requires change to be successful, then the ability to sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with a member of your team that is based on observation of a customer interaction, to be able to deconstruct that customer interaction and highlight the critical areas that need to change, and then to be able to have a conversation that provides clarity, builds capability and motivation in the individual consultant or frontline team member for them to actually go and do something differently. That's absolutely the critical core skill. Now, we add to that then, of course, the group sessions that we need to be doing, the team meetings, the focus sessions, the day starters, to be able to facilitate high energy, engaging sessions that leverage best practice and allow peer-to-peer coaching are absolutely critical to a high-performing sales and service organisation and improving both sales and service results, but also great customer outcomes. The third one we've got here is informal coaching on the floor. You simply, as a team leader, must be spending enough time in your business to understand where your people are at and listening to the quality of the conversation being had with the customer. It is also a critical opportunity to leverage off the one-on-ones which sort of set the scene for the key development opportunities. The informal coaching are where you can do high-frequency, consistent coaching and feedback on the fly between calls that creates lots and lots of opportunities for people to take on development tasks and set goals around improving their capability. And then the final one is in the Big Four is the art of calibration. Now, whenever organisations are going through change programs or trying to improve the quality of the conversation with the customer, the first thing we think you need to do is to develop a shared understanding of what great looks like throughout the entire group of leaders. If you haven't got this basis, then the other three routines that we're talking about on this slide will be less effective, and what can happen is all of your team leaders can be off doing them in a different way because there is no shared understanding of what we're actually trying to achieve, and that leads to very inconsistent coaching and then obviously inconsistent outputs. So if these are the right actions for a high-performing TL, then what is the right frequency? So I want to start this conversation by, to help really answer this question, it's really useful to think about the amount of change that you are achieving over time plotted on the following axes, with the star representing the desired amount of change in the required time frame for the business to be successful. As a bit of background to this conversation, just want to let you know that Grist's background is in behavioural psychology, which actually tells us a lot about how people react to change. And one of the key principles we can learn from behavioural psychology is that the smaller the change that you ask someone to make, the less resistance you will encounter, and the higher the chances are that the person will succeed when they try the new and different behaviour. However, if you look at the operating rhythm in many sales and service organisations, it looks more like this. The slide here illustrates a standard approach to developing sales and service consultants that is based on conversations that are too infrequent, and as a result are asking people to take on too much of change at any one time. The result being that if there is any change at all, it usually drops away quickly over time as people revert to old behaviours. I'm sure that many of you listening have felt this at times as you feel like you're coaching, your people are like rubber bands that snap back to their old ways of doing things as soon as the pressure is off. So we know that there's got to be a better way for TLs to be using their time in order to achieve the change. Now this slide shows what really effective coaching and development looks like. It is based on the principle that small steps delivered at a high frequency is the better way to go. Shorter, sharper conversations based on the big 4 TL routines carried out at a high frequency. And this starts to help us realise the importance of not only the one-on-one coaching but also the informal coaching, so that we can be asking our people to be making 2 or 3 or even 4 small steps of change every day as they take little steps towards building the ultimate capability that we're looking for. So this now begs the question, if the quality and quantity of the conversation between the frontline and TLs based on the big 4 is so critical, how are TLs in the Australian market actually performing at the current time? So to help answer this question, we developed a sales and service leadership benchmark that specifically measures the quality and quantity of the big 4 routines and the impact, the clarity and that they have on the clarity, capability and motivation of the front line. Now the benchmark is based on surveying the frontline and team leaders and asking them the same questions about how often they either carry out, if that's a team leader, or receive the big 4 routines if you're a frontline consultant, and then also how effective they are. The overall score is a combination of the quality and frequency scores, as we believe they're both critical to overall effectiveness. So for example, it doesn't matter how well I can conduct a coaching session if I rarely do it. So the scores are based on a combination of both results. These results are based on surveying over 1,000 people. And what they show is straight away that team leaders overestimate the effectiveness of their leadership they're providing when compared to frontline, who rate the overall effectiveness of leadership that they get from TLs at only 38%, whereas team managers and team leaders are rating their capability at 53%. And then if we dive down to a more granular level to look at some of the specific benchmarking criteria that lead to these scores, obviously there's quite a lot of criteria that go into coming up with both the quality and frequency scores that are in this benchmark. But just to give you a little bit of a feeling for some of the underlying problems that are identified by this benchmark is that only 17% of frontline staff report that they receive coaching and development on a weekly basis. The majority of frontline staff report that during coaching the leader does the majority of the talking. Now this is a dead giveaway as to the quality of the coaching conversation, how engaging it is and how much self-awareness is being raised in the actual frontline consultant. We also note from this benchmark, the frontline report, that their leaders are conducting very little informal coaching on the floor. Now this is not to say that their leaders aren't out on the floor, but they're not actually conducting what we would call actual informal coaching on the floor. Now I do see that there is a question there about was this study conducted in Australia. Absolutely. All of the people that we surveyed for this particular benchmark were working in large sales and service organisations in the Australian market. So in summary, these results show that there is a real opportunity to improve. So we now know that from the case studies, if we can improve team leader capability and the quality and quantity of the conversations, we can absolutely drive outputs. And we also know, based on this research, that there is a real gap between what many team leaders are doing and what would be considered to be best practice. Sorry, I'm just having a little bit of trouble getting the next screen to come up. So, given that there's a real opportunity to improve, let's now have a quick look at what this might look like. If we put this, the knowledge that we've been, or the things that we've been speaking about the Big Four routines, and we put that together with the sort of frequency that is really required, then what does that actually look like when you look at a week in the life of? Now, the calendar shown here is based on some of the highest performing team leaders that we've come across, and also on our experience that shows to achieve the full potential of a sales and service team, the team leader needs to be spending the majority of their time proactively looking for opportunities to develop their team using a combination of the Big Four routines. And just to clarify here, firefighting and reactively fielding constant questions from your team does not count in the majority of time that needs to be spent proactively developing your team. So, best practice we've seen is getting team leaders to be conducting elements of the Big Four for around at least 60% of their week, which is around 24 hours in a week. Now, this is based on them having a fairly full team, which is generally around that 10 to 12 mark as what we're seeing as ideal. Going much above that, then you start to really struggle to be able to spend the amount of time that you need with each person in your team to drive their performance and be able to harness the full potential of the team. Now, we certainly understand that each organisation and TL would have to tailor their calendar to suit the team and the circumstances. However, there is an effective rhythm to a sales and service week that is set out here that we'd ask you to have a look at. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if many of you are not looking at this calendar and thinking there's absolutely no way that we could do that in our organisation. And that may well be so, given the way that your organisation is currently set up, the span of control, so the way that TLs are currently led, and some of the conflicting messages that you might have in your organisation about what the TL role is all about. But what I can tell you is if you can't get somewhere near or close to this calendar, then you will not lead your teams to achieve their full potential. That's a given. It's been proven. It's been researched over time. So I guess the key point here is don't kid yourself that you'll be able to get the full potential out of your team if you can't get somewhere closer to this calendar that we've got on the board up here. Okay. There's a couple of questions here that have come through that we might just take some time to think about. The question is, I have often thought that at some point every organisation will reach change saturation where it can no longer effectively take on change. Is this something that you've seen out there in practice? That's a great question, and the answer to that would be absolutely. What we're seeing is that as the pace of change in society and marketplaces absolutely increases, organisations are trying to respond by driving ever more change through their businesses. We would actually, and what actually happens, of course, is many of the changes don't land properly, and then before we've actually landed the change, we move on to something else, and then that change is either at best ineffective or lost to the organisation for good. What we would say to that is that there is only really one answer, and that is to truly understand, are you actually doing everything you can with the individuals in your team to help them change as quickly as possible? This is not saying that there's not a ceiling. There absolutely is a ceiling, and organisations need to be much, much better at looking through all of the things they could do and taking out all of the things that aren't absolutely critical. Leaders have got to be better at actually focusing on fewer change initiatives that will deliver better results over time. But the foundation of change is always the conversation between a leader and their people. So if you can increase the frequency and quality of those conversations, you will be able to drive more change through your organisation. Now that doesn't mean that you'll be able to drive every change, but you will be able to drive more change. So we have another question. Was there a guide to determine the Big Four effectiveness of informal coaching versus formal one-on-one coaching? Yeah, absolutely. We don't ever see these as one or the other. The formal coaching is sort of the bedrock. It's where if there's any difficult issues that need to be resolved or there's any true change resistance, these things absolutely need to be covered off in a one-on-one conversation, some usually taking place away from the team environment where we can sit down and we can be not interrupted and we can make sure that we really understand what's motivating this person to behave in the way they are and clearly explain the reasons and the benefits as to why we would like them to change to something differently. But the informal coaching is just so critical because it really reinforces those behavioural psychology principles which suggest that if we ask people to take really small steps to change, they become less intimidated and the chances of success are much, much higher. And the only way that then you're going to be able to, if you accept this notion of small steps, then the only way you're going to be able to get to the level of change that you want is to just absolutely increase the frequency with which you ask the team member to actually make these changes. And that's where the informal coaching comes in so critical. And that's why in the calendar there you'll see that we're looking at that minimum of 2 hours a day of spending time. When you ask what do the frontline actually rate as the most effective, we did ask that question in the surveys, and I don't actually have that right with me at the moment, but we definitely will come back to you with an answer about that particular question as to which of the particular routines do frontline rate as the most effective. What I can tell you is it's either one of the one-on-one or the informal coaching. Those two were rated the most highly. There's another question we've got here. There are 1,000 different coaching structures. Is there any that suggest is the best to run? Whilst this is not specifically covered in the benchmark, what I can tell you is that there are many coaching models out there that have been embedded into organisations that were never designed for how they're actually being used. So I'll give you one example. The GROW coaching model. The GROW coaching model was designed for lifestyle coaching. It is great if you are having a long-term career development conversation with someone, and they're also great for conversations where you're acting as a facilitator and it's based on the premise that the person being coached will know all of the answers. We do not believe that that is an effective coaching model for a sales and service organisation for the sort of conversations we're talking about here. The conversations that we're talking about here are extremely tactical. They don't need to start with things like, well, how do you think you went on that call? Because this person should know what the focus of their development is right now, and we should be able to cut to the chase. So we might be starting our coaching sessions by saying, so give me a summary of how you went in the first 30 seconds of that call in regard to the sales process that we have which calls that engage. Talk me through how you went, because that's the area of focus. And the tactical coaching we're talking about that we find most effective really is based on 4 or 5 key questions, which is what happened? You know, what's the reality? Where did we get to? Did we achieve what we set out to achieve based on the last coaching session that we had and the SMART goals we set? Why did we either achieve those things or not? So this is talking about not only the outcome but talking about the behaviours but also the underlying mindsets and values and beliefs that may be impacting this person's ability to take on the behaviours that we want. Once we've established that and we've created self-awareness about the outcome we're trying to change and why that outcome came about through behaviours and mindset, we've then earned the right to start moving forward and talking about the how. And the how is all about referring back to our sales and service methodologies and what we actually want to create for the customer, and then picking a piece of that out and that becoming the focus of the development for the next period of time. And then the final part is the when, which is when are we actually going to do that, and the notion of setting SMART goals so people are very clear about what they need to do and the results they need to achieve within a certain time frame. So I hope that's answered your question, but in summary, you need to really understand whether you've got a tactical coaching model which is based on, I've just listened to you do something, I've just observed, we're going to have a conversation now, we're going to agree on a change, and that change is going to be demonstrated with the very next customer. If your coaching model is not along those lines, then you do not have an effective coaching model that works well in a sales and service environment. Okay, so thank you very much for the couple of questions. There was one other question as well, which I can see here, which is, what do you see as the biggest blocker that gets in the way for TLs executing the Big Four? So this is we could talk about this all day, but if I just want to try and give you a summary of what we've learned is, if you have an understanding of behavioural psychology, you'll understand that the vast majority of people's preference is to do the reactive task over the proactive. So think about yourself, you come in, you've got a strategic report or something to do for the day, and you sort of come in and you think, oh God, I don't really want to start that, I'll just check my emails. And that's sort of a classic, the reactive versus the proactive. There's one thing I can just open up and I can just react, or the other thing I've really got to sit down and put some thought, and it'll be mainly driven by, my own thinking and knowledge. And if you think about where TLs are these days, they're just bombarded with messages to move to the reactive versus the proactive. So if you don't have an organisation that is absolutely clear about the role you want your team leaders to do, has calendars like the one that's in front of you that clearly demonstrate what we want TLs to be doing, if they're not rewarded and recognised and incented based on actually carrying out these routines, then inevitably they will revert to proactive type behaviours and stop doing some of these. The other thing is technology, as I mentioned before, is absolutely not helping. And then the third one that I would throw in there to summarise this conversation is capability. If I don't know how to actually be a good coach, if I don't have the right model, if I don't understand the sales methodology, if I can't calibrate against what we want a great customer outcome to look like, then I've got no hope of being an effective coach. So what that leads to is then, of course, an avoidance of these routines because I don't think they're actually effective and I don't get any fun out of them and I find them quite difficult. So hopefully that answers your question about some of the major blockers. All right, now conscious of time, so what I'd like to do now is to just start to get you thinking about what you might be able to do differently, because it's one thing to know the information and to take on board what we've presented so far, but it really is another thing to then take action. So based on our consulting experience, if you're thinking that you have a gap then and would like to improve, we suggest that you start by asking yourself a series of questions to identify the size of the gap and what you can do to improve. Look, the questions on this page have been sent to you via email so that you have a copy, and you can certainly start to use these after this webinar. But for those of you who are listening to this group as a group, and we know there's a few of you, can I suggest that there is never a better time than right now to start considering these questions. I would also encourage you to spend more time focusing on what you must have your TLs doing and encouraging them to do it, as opposed to trying to identify all of the blockers and spending weeks trying to solve these problems that may not be real. It always amazes me when you get clear with your leaders right down to the granular point where you can show a calendar like the one I just put in front of you. It always amazes me how quickly the noise starts to fall away, and you can save yourself the trouble of having to go through and do these time and motion studies. The best way I've seen this work is that we get absolutely clear about what we get people doing, and then the end of each week we ask all of the TLs to come back with a list of everything they couldn't get to, and then as a team you make decisions about how to either delegate those things to other people, do them more efficiently, or in a lot of cases make decisions about the fact that you just don't need to do some of these things because they're not adding value. So Finally, if there's no more questions to come through, then what I would really like to do is to thank you for joining us on the webinar. I hope that we've been able to provoke you to think about how you compare to best practice with regard to team leader effectiveness and give you some ideas about how you can actually improve. So on the slide here you'll see our details, so please give us a call if you'd like any further help. This is what we do and we can help, or even if you'd like to participate in our next round of sales and service leadership benchmarking to understand and get an external view of how effective your team leaders are being at actually leading your front line, and we know then that that is the key driver of affecting the conversation with the customer and driving your outputs. So I'm now going to give you 10 minutes back in your day, so there's a good time management strategy straight away. Thank you all for listening. Once again, I hope it's been of value, and I hope that we talk to you at some stage in the future. And good luck as you go out there and try and make some decisions about how you can be more effective. Thank you very much.